Mr. Jones Sawyer.
I'd like to change the direction of this discussion, and I'm not certain if this panel can answer whether or not it's in Ms. Atkins' subcommittee or if this committee that will ultimately be able to address this. Right now, we're doing this kind of 10,000 foot high down to the local level, probably with the exception of Mr. Laurel from the city of West Sacramento. I'm probably the only person that's actually started to fill out a DDR, know what it's like to do an ROP. I was director of real estate for the city of Los Angeles when this whole, we like to use the word debacle happened, and it was pretty rough. It was chaos at every level you could be. For me, as director of real estate for the city, knowing I was going to get all the CRA property, I probably became the most popular real estate person in the city of LA overnight when they thought that we would just have a wholesale sale of all the property, which was some very lucrative property downtown, Bunker Hill, some really nice skyscrapers and a lot of redevelopment projects. But that didn't happen. We then started to begin this process. And what I don't know if anyone's doing this, what I would like to start happening is for us to look at, from the city standpoint, looking up or looking out. I'm pretty sure you know what a Pyrrhic victory is. It's a victory, a victory with such a devastating cost that is tantamount to a defeat. And we've gone through all this. I used to be at the local level as a bureaucrat. Now I'm here, and I have projects that were started and have now probably stopped in South Los Angeles with probably no future of it being completed because of what has been done. And I want to have that discussion of what we can do to ensure that, especially the least disadvantaged areas, that they're not left behind. Normally in redevelopment, you start from the low-hanging fruit. So obviously Staples Arena is done, and we have a beautiful place down there. There's a wonderful Bunker Hill projects. There are a lot of things that were done with redevelopment, great things. And there were a lot of problems with redevelopment. But at the end of the day, the last projects were in the least advantaged areas where developers probably didn't want to go to early on. And so I would like to have a discussion or to have someone look at, and actually, and I don't want to preempt my friends from West Sac and from the League of Cities, but I would like to have an honest discussion on the impacts of the redevelopment, but not just, complaining about everything, but let's talk about the good things of redevelopment. What can we do now to move on to, and I know there's some legislation being done, but what can we do to continue redevelopment in a positive way, the way it was really meant to be, and that we just don't do this, get over this pain, and never go back to going into talking about redevelopment again in a positive standpoint. And so, again, I didn't want to preempt what the next speakers would say, and maybe this intros into them, but I really want to have a real discussion on the impacts of smaller cities and larger ones.
Either finance or controller can comment on that, or we can go straight to the other panel and then have that discussion as we.
I'll just add, I'm happy to have that discussion with you, and I think finance is happy to have that discussion. I do know that the city of LA and the county of LA have received substantial sums that are available to them to help continue with projects that may have been stalled, that aren't enforceable obligations, that maybe they were planning to do in the future, that they now have this revenue that is not dedicated to anything that they can use. For instance, the city of LA alone has received over $100 million in monies that has been returned to them. The county has received over $400 million. So there are substantial monies going back to these local government entities for which they can spend on economic development and other projects that they want to push forward, for those locals to make those decisions on. But we're happy to have that broader conversation.
In all due deference, that's top down. If they needed $1 billion and you only gave them $100 million, you get my point.
Well, perhaps we'll move to the next panel. So we'll hear now from Aaron Laurel, who's the Economic Development Manager from the City of West Sacramento, followed by Patrick Whitnell, who's the general counsel for the League of California Cities. So, Aaron.
Good morning, Madam Chair. And actually, hopefully this will be a good segue. I can speak to both the dissolution process and kind of what the city's been doing looking ahead. Just a little bit of background. I was involved on city staff with dissolution. I also was redevelopment agency staff. And I'm also involved in looking ahead to what the city will be doing in the future regarding economic development. I'm sure Patrick will be able to offer a much more thorough view of the dissolution experience of most cities, common challenges they faced. I'm going to focus my comments on West Sacramento's experience first. And really, the themes are that through the dissolution process, we try to do everything to the law, the right way. And then secondly, that we're really ready to move on from this process, and we still need a little bit of help. So if you're familiar with West Sacramento's story, you know the redevelopment was a big part of what we did on infrastructure and assembling land. We invested over $130 million in infrastructure and doubled that with grants. We also assembled over 200 acres of property, which now the successor agency is the owner. So by the time the court decision on AB 1X26 hit us in late 2011, and dissolution was the reality, we had taken two steps. One, we made sure our house was in order so that we could go through, navigate the dissolution process smoothly. And secondly, we started looking ahead to figure out how we could reconstitute similar tools. Because in our city, you know, we had done so much work with redevelopment. We've only been incorporated since 1987. Had an enormous amount of challenges, and those tools are absolutely essential to continuing that positive change. So on dissolution, in November 2012, we became the first city in the state to pass the Comptroller's Office audit of asset transfers. And following that, and after several unsuccessful meet and confers, pretty much that's all we had. We made all of our required payments resulting from the state's due diligence reviews of our housing assets and other funds and accounts. And in May 2013, we received our finding of completion. In October 2013, our oversight board approved our long-range property management plan. That was submitted to the Department of Finance for review. So we met the 6-month deadline from the point of finding completion to submitting that plan. On top of complying with all the requirements, we didn't make a lot of the same mistakes or missteps that you've heard about in a lot of other places. For example, we didn't transfer our redevelopment assets to the city. We didn't issue additional bond debt after January 2011, and we expended nearly all of our existing bonds prior to that date. So in short, like I said, we've done everything we were mandated to do under the law. Although it's been quite painful along the way and resulted in major delays to lots of our projects, we did it in a way that hopefully made the tough work that finance and the Comptroller's Office had a little easier. But going back to the theme of moving on, starting from the point dissolution was introduced, our mayor, Christopher Cabaldon, he led a local initiative to create a new paradigm for economic development in our city. So we adopted a comprehensive plan looking at different potential tools. The main point I want to make here is that our city council took the step to actually go to voters with an advisory measure on the money that comes back to the city. Should it be used for infrastructure? And the measure actually passed by 87% in West Sacramento. That was in November 2012. And I think that really showed that the public understood the investments, the importance of them, and how important it is to keep that going in the city. So that measure, this goes back to the point about the cities that get money back from the process. We have about $4 million a year. It pales in comparison to the $23 million we used to have, but it still keeps us going for some of our infrastructure projects, matching grants, that sort of thing. So as we go forward, we like to be a model of how to do redevelopment in the future, whatever we're going to call it. But like I said, we need some help in getting us from the gap between dissolution and to the future. So the legislature and governor have already helped in some ways with the recent enactment of AB 471. Thank you to Member Atkins for that. And that allowed the formation of infrastructure financing districts in former redevelopment areas. And also the enactment of AB 440, which passed Polanco Act authority to cities. That should be a big deal for us as well. We also support the governor's local government proposal for IFDs. I'd be happy to elaborate on that if there's any questions. But lastly, I'll just echo what you've already heard from probably a lot of your constituents and in local government, is that the last major item, that long-range property management plan, it's been a challenge to get it approved on a timely basis, and we understand that finance is under a tremendous workload. But going back to my earlier point, we have 200 acres of property, infill development sites, some near our riverfront property that we worked really hard for a long time to assemble. That's sitting there now. It's tied up in this process. And the deadline is a concern. The January 2015 is, but the delay is a much bigger concern. We have deals that we can't do right now because of these properties being held up. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to get those plans approved. And yeah, with your help, with a new tax increment tool, with the IFDs, and getting these plans approved, I think we can start making progress again. And we appreciate the legislature's help on that. And thank you for allowing me to share our perspective.
Thank you. So we'll now hear from League of Cities.
Good morning, Madam Chair and the committee. Patrick Whitnell, General Counsel for the League. I think I'll continue on with the theme of moving on. You've received the report from DOF on the litigation. I don't have much to add to that. The litigation is the litigation. It's going to take several years to resolve, and you don't get the volume of litigation without disputes. And I think it's the nature of a complex statute meeting very difficult factual issues. Every redevelopment agency is unique. Every deal that they've done, every contract, every parcel has its own story behind it. And when the meet and confer process, while it's very helpful, at least to allow the two sides to come together in a face-to-face manner, it's not a neutral evaluation process. That neutral evaluation process is carried out by the courts. And so that's why, and that's the way that AB 1484 was set up. I mean, that was recognized that you get the parties together, DOF and the city successor agency, you get them talking. At the end of the day, if they've got fundamental disagreements, then the courts serve as that neutral evaluation. So the existing lawsuits will continue to work themselves through. And so looking at, going back to the theme of moving on, what can we suggest to the legislature and to the administration in terms of being able to cut down on the number of potential future lawsuits, potential future disputes, and to move the dissolution process along? Because cities, we agree with DOF that, and I think the legislature as well, that this needs to be done expeditiously. We're 3 years into the process, and it's not entirely clear when we will conclude the process. But as Aaron pointed out, there are properties that are ready to be developed that can't be because there is uncertainty as to the legal status of those properties as they move out of the dissolution process. So what cities are looking for is two things: certainty and finality. Certainty that decisions will be made promptly, and finality that once the decisions have been made, they won't be reopened, or there won't be additional reviews that the city will have to go through after they've received their approval. For example, in the long-range property management plan, once a city receives approval of that plan, what reviews are undertaken when the city goes to enter into a disposition contract or a transfer contract with a third party? Does the city need to go back? Does that need to go back to the oversight board? If it goes back to the oversight board, does that open up DOF approval? What is the timeline for that? What is the ultimate resolution of that if there is disagreements between the city and the oversight board, or city and DOF? And let me just mention, I'm using city as shorthand for successor agency as well, and county, and but I'm League of California Cities. So that finality, and that's particularly important in terms of property transfers and property dispositions, because you need to get a title insurer to issue a clean title insurance policy, and they're not going to do that. They're going to be very reluctant, and we've heard this from a number of different title insurance companies that they want to have all potential review and decisions made on a piece of property before they'll issue a clean title insurance policy. So those are the kind of things that cities would like to see from the legislature and the administration, is increasing the certainty that cities have that they will receive a quick review and approval process, and that once that is done, then that's a final decision, and cities can move forward and enter into the agreements, transfer the property, do whatever they need to do in terms of their obligations, without having to worry that there is some other, at some later point in time, their issues, their enforceable obligations, their plans, their DDRs, their audits will be reopened. So the League believes that we can make this process better than it has been, and to help provide cities with that certainty and finality, and we're look forward to working with the legislature and the administration in the coming months to help make the dissolution process better for cities and all parties involved in the dissolution process. So I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, Mr. Chavez, hold off. I'll do a question and then I'll call on you. And are there any other members who want to be on the list? Okay. Ms. Atkins, I'm putting you on the list. I'm assuming you'll have a question for. Okay. All right. So I appreciate both of your remarks to us, and I guess part of, if we want, it seems, from my point of view, one of the themes of this oversight hearing is we would like this process to go smoother. It was the intent of the legislation, and it is the intent of the legislature, both so we, the state, can recover the general fund monies that we were looking forward to, so that we can recover the funds that we are passing on to the local governments themselves and to the cities, but also so that we don't incur a lot of costs in lawsuits and such. So any specific recommendations that anyone at the table has that might assist us as we proceed in trying to make this process smoother? It's okay if you want to think about it, because I can ask.
I'll just
Yes,
say,
Right.
I think the report for this hearing actually had some good suggestions about improving the long-range property management plan process. So just clarifying some of the unknowns, I guess, once the plan is approved.
Okay, kind of consistent with
There's a little bit of a
Okay.
concern there. And I think the earlier point I made, and it was talked about earlier, is that if it's whatever needs to be done to get these plans accelerated, the approvals, I think it's a point that it's good for everyone to get these properties back on the market and allow successor agencies to move on. It really does mean, at the end of the day, more money for the taxing entities once we're able to transact on these properties. So I think it's in everyone's best interest to get the property management plans approved. If it means more staff or whatever else needs to happen, I would definitely support that.
So perhaps Department of Finance, again, these are, this is just a hearing. We're only hearing partial, in effect, reports, but from the depiction of West Sac, it would appear that their intent was to follow the process as DOF laid out for them, and at least in the way it's been reported, they complied with that, and yet they're still not in a place of approval. So this may just be consistent with what we were talking about before, but any insight you might have to offer us on that?
Well, I don't have the specifics
Yeah,
on
we're under review.
West
Yeah.
Sac plan. My understanding it's currently under review, and
It
it's
is,
quite a
yeah.
it's quite a ways along too. In fact, so I don't think it'll be much longer. And to the extent every plan that we have, our analysts have already contacted those agencies. So while we still have 160 or 170 left to go, everyone's been contacted and everyone's under review at this time. So, and as it relates to the certain, we're happy to help clarify where we think, there is certainty, because things, once the plan is approved, we agree that it governs. They don't have to come back to finance for certain things, and if you need clarification around what those things are, we're happy to, have that conversation, because we do want, West Sac to move on.
So that may be something that we have to monitor over the course of this year, is that as the approval process is sort of speeded up, because it will have to be to get that 170 through, but if we then encounter that either contracts or the kinds of things that the League of Cities representative raised get relooked at or not. Again, I don't want to preclude. There may be cases where that's totally appropriate, but I think we would want to monitor whether there's either undue amounts of that or amounts that cause, again, more timing in terms of hang-ups.
Right, and may I give you like another example of something that we've come across? It's just, we don't think about these things until they come up for the first time. And here's an example of something that's happened: is we had an entity who we approved their plan, they were ready to go forth, and they realized they wanted to change their plan. Well, they didn't want to do how they originally said they wanted to dispose of it. Instead, they wanted to sell the property. What do we do in that case? Well, it wasn't really clear. So we said, well, just submit a revised plan saying that you want to now sell your property. They did. We approved it, and they moved on. But again, so we have entities out there who've put forth their plan, but now they may be thinking they want to tweak their plan. So those are just some of the weird things that pop up as we go through this process, and people look to us, and it's not 100% crystal clear what do we do in those situations.
Okay. All right, well, Mr. Chavez?
Thank you. Sorry I missed some of it. I'm doing two hearings, one in education, one here, but I've caught the beginning of this. And Mr. Howard, I was pleased that you talked about streamlining the process and looking at, where you're here. And just for your information, I used to run a state agency. And so I understand, the volume when you're looking at the state of California and looking at all the thousands of, 1,500 actions you had to been reviewed. I mean, that's a hell of a administrative challenge that you had undertaken. I was just wondering, how big is your organization that's overseeing this?
So just within the local government unit, we have about 65 total staff that are dedicated to this process. Well, then they do more than just this process. They also do local government budget stuff that aren't involved with RDA. But so our local government unit handles the budget, the state budget related to local government issues, and we also handle the dissolution of RDAs.
About 65 people working on
in some fashions, having or impacting this. Give you an interesting statistic, if I may, that'll kind of give you a sense of the volume of stuff. I mean, obviously, as you alluded to, we have the 15,000 various decisions that we've made, but in the last 18 months, we have a redevelopment inbox, right, where everybody sends us their questions and comments and forms, and we've received over 50,000 emails into that single redevelopment inbox in an 18-month period. That's 90 emails every day of the week for the last 18 months that we've been going through and handling and responding to. So we are still going through some significant volumes of communication, and I'm pleased to report that we are getting back to everybody. We've implemented a comprehensive communication plan to make sure we do respond to people, and so we have been getting back to people in a timely manner. But that's just to underscore how much we are going through and trying to work through on a statewide basis.
And I've had a series of meetings with your department, some of your people, on some of the redevelopment districts in my district, some of the cities that are inquiring. One of my impressions were, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we got rid of the redevelopment under the guise that we needed more general fund money to go in education. But originally, if you look back why we originally did redevelopment, 30-some years ago, was the idea to increase the property value of it so that we'd have more revenue coming into the state. We're taking blighted areas and make them more better tax revenue areas. So, but now for this past 3 years we've been going through this, as has been identified by WESAC, and I think, as I heard the League of Cities say, is that this process has actually slowed down development of land, because there's a big question about, can we do whatever we think we need to do there to put up a hotel, which in my district I have a whole redevelopment area on the beach which has coastal permit approval, but we can't do anything because of this whole process that we're going through right now, which is stopping the development of a whole coastal area, which increased the tax increment significantly. So what I'd be interested in is if there's anything, and follow off what that Chairman Skinner said, is there a specific action we can do, in particular between the Oversight Board and the Department of Finance, to reduce the administrative burden, to give some certainty and finality to the city so they could actually do projects, so that we could reduce your burden, this bureaucratic machine that we're feeding, but put the responsibility and the accountability down at the cities to do what they need to know, what they need to do to improve the property. Is there anything, what can we do to help legislatively? Do you really want to see everybody to send a report to you every 6 months for every one of the things, every time they got an idea they got to do something in one of their projects?
Well, no, ultimately, once they have their approved plan, they can go off and, use those properties for the, in accordance with their approved plan. They don't need to come back to us, especially once it goes to the city. I mean, that's outside of our purview, and we wouldn't want to see it. Legislatively speaking, I mean, I think we're comfortable with the current law where it's at. We want to see improvements made once we get to the single countywide oversight board in 2016. We think that is the key date for us at Finance, because one, we'll hopefully work through the property plans, and we'll reviewed everything on every ROPS. And so that's really our target goal, in which we want to start beginning having those conversations in spring of 2015 about simplifying the process, and even for outside of the property plans, but just to the ROPS, and looking to possibly going down to a single process a year instead of a biannual process a year. I think that alone will make it easier. I think my friends in West Sac would agree. And I think that's the appropriate time to do it, and that's where we really want to target in the future.
Well, I'd just like to see, I'm sorry, you had an idea?
Excuse me. Yeah, I would just add to that. First of all, agree with definitely on the annual ROPS would be a help to cash flow for some of the cities, including ourselves.
That actually came out of a request from City of Vista to have me ask that question, an annual ROPS. So
yeah, and then more so, I think, just looking ahead to some of the tools that we had, I mentioned this earlier, tools that we had under Redevelopment Authority, the main one being tax increment. That tool you can't restore without, a new program. We're looking at IFDs. I think what you're going to find is every city's situation is going to be a little unique. So I don't think it's going to be a one-size-fits-all solution, but I think clearly the legislature has a role in defining what some of those tools could be. You have a proposal from Finance, actually, through the governor's budget proposal that has to do with IFDs that we're supporting, but there are other ideas out there, and I think that's where the attention needs to be looking forward.
Well, like as Chairman Skinner asked, I'd like to know those, and so we could all sign in, because I think we need to have them. And later on today, Mr. Howard, you're going to be hearing from Oceanside. I guess they're having their oversight bond on a couple of products and projects they're looking at, and they're concerned about the Department of Finances. They'll be seeing them, so I'll be hopefully talking to you later on how that fares out. But thank you very much, Chairman.
Certainly. Mr. Jones Sawyer.
I'll just actually quickly say, because I'm very encouraged from the Department of Finance being flexible on the long-range property management plans. And I think as you start to listen to cities like San Diego, Anaheim, Santa Monica, Oceanside, Berkeley, Fresno, Camarillo, and Dana Point, you can get a myriad of different ideas of how they want to dispose of the land. But having that flexibility, maybe coming back every year, I think will help, because real estate and property, they're living things. And a lot of times people think of buildings as being static and they're just in one place, and they're not that. They're very, as probably my friend from West Sac will tell you, different ideas happen all the time. You may want to put a football stadium one place one day in LA, and you may have an opportunity to put it somewhere else. But anyway, at the end of the day, each city has a set of priorities, and those priorities do change. It's very dynamic, and obviously not bogging you down with a lot of bureaucracy would be very important, but also allowing them the flexibility, the local level, to be able to do what they need to do would be great. Thank you.